Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Delicatessen Restaurant. I'm Aaron Rand, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette and Lesley Chesterman, and our special guest today, the president of Concordia University, Graham Carr. Graham, thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Well, there's certainly nothing going on.
Yeah, really nothing to talk about.
I don't know why you're here.
I don't know where we start, but I don't know. Let's pick one.
All right.
Look, it's $3,000. That's what the government says you will have to charge out-of-province students to continue to come to Concordia if they want to, along with McGill. Then it's the 80% French rule that will mean they will have to graduate with a proficiency in French at a
intermediate
5, whatever
level.
that is.
Yeah.
Let me start by, and maybe this is a bit unfair, we learned just the other day that McGill, after getting no help from the government, and of course Concordia, having heard nothing back from the Minister of Higher Education either, said, you know what, our plan is we are going to grant, and I think it's roughly 80% of the out-of-province students, a $3,000, what they call Canada Award, to circumvent this extra tuition hike. The first thing I thought to myself was, great way to get around it. And the second thing I thought was, why didn't they confer with Concordia? Why wasn't there discussion to try to do this all for one for all routine?
So I can't answer why they didn't on the second part of that question. Certainly, we're also looking at what we might be able to do to provide some financial support for students who want to study at Concordia. Obviously, we don't have the means that McGill does. I think people in the community understand that very well. But it's also important for us to make it clear to prospective students that we do have scholarship offerings. They need to apply for it. We want them to come to Montreal for all of the reasons that have made the city great and make Concordia great. And maybe one extra thing that we offer that McGill doesn't offer is we really put an accent on experiential learning, including work-integrated learning, co-op, etc. If you come to Concordia, you have the opportunity to do work-integrated learning as part of your studies. And that can lead to, to paid employment, to job opportunities after graduation. So I think that's a unique value proposition as well.
Have you already seen it? I think you have. I think the story came out. There has been a drop-off in applications?
There was a 20% drop-off in applications before the announcement last week from rest of Canada students, essentially the same percentage that McGill had seen. And, we had forecast that was going to happen from day one, and unfortunately it is happening. Now our challenge is really to double down on trying to communicate with prospective students.
Is that because of the money or because of the French requirement?
So that would have been because of the money, because at that point the number that was on the table was $17,000. And there was no discussion other than the proposal we had put forward for Francisization. So the 80% Francisization, that's a new element.
Right. Will that get people to drop off as well?
Well, potentially. Lesley, we had targeted 40% when we met with the Premier because the three universities felt that was a realistic target, and there was a way to frame that very positively. Come to Quebec, come to Concordia, come to McGill, come to Bishops, acquire a second global
Learn
skill.
a beautiful language.
Learn another language, increase your job opportunities, career opportunities, or for us, your work-integrated learning opportunities while you're there. There was a way to frame that was super positive. You could customize training for students in business versus engineering versus fine arts. They don't all have the same needs. And we also know that students coming from the rest of Canada, many of them are coming through immersion programs.
Right.
They're not starting from nothing.
Right.
So you could calibrate things, and we were really comfortable with that proposal. Then suddenly the number 80 comes up. Where did that figure come from, other than it's twice what 40 is?
Right.
But it gives a different message because it makes it look more punitive. It makes it more compulsory. And we were trying to avoid that.
But I would think on a financial level, that probably stings even more. And you mentioned, of course, McGill is probably better endowed, and they can, I don't know if they can afford it or not, they're offering $3,000 award with that. You must have something up your sleeve in terms of trying to offset those tuition increases, a plan somewhere to make it attractive financially.
Yeah, so we'll be making an announcement early in the new year to try to explain to prospective students what financial support is available for them. Also, to really double down on the messaging around work-integrated learning. Part of the challenge, Bill, is that the financial cost that the universities are experiencing as a result of the government announcements is real. But if you don't make the effort to secure part of that market, the cost is actually going to be even greater. So this is an investment that we feel we will have to make. Maybe not to the extent that McGill is making it, but we feel we need to make it to send a message that students from Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, Fredericton, we want you. Come. You're a big part of who we are.
But will this also make it easier for local kids to get into these schools? Or is that a bad way of...
Yeah, I don't think we've ever, certainly at Concordia, 70% of our students are Quebecois.
Right. Okay.
So as opposed to Bishops where it's 50%. So students coming, whether they're Anglophone or Francophone through the Quebec system, they're welcome at Concordia. And we've never had any kind of quotas for international rest of camp. What I'm worried about locally, though, is that we don't lose some of the Anglophone SAGEP market because of students who decide, you know what, I don't want to have to fulfill those French language requirements. I'm going to do 1 year of SAGEP, and then I'm going to transfer to universities in the rest of the country. So I think we need to, make an appeal to the SAGEPs, to parents, to members of the Anglophone community about, the importance of trying to support our institutions and the quality of education.
But the local kids might already have that level, so they don't have to
They
worry about
probably
that
do.
either.
They probably do.
I'd worry about the kids coming from elsewhere who, as much as I love speaking French, and a lot of us do here, are saying, why? Why do I have to learn French? I have enough stuff to learn already,
So what we would do students coming from the rest of Canada or international students who come have to do 1 year additional to what a student from Quebec does in terms of their studies. So our goal is to create effectively a foundation year and say to those students, as part of the foundation year, we'd like you to take 6 credits in French, but by the way, you don't have to count your performance in those courses for your GPA. You can pass the courses, you can get credit for the courses, but you can elect not to have it count toward your GPA.
Okay.
And that way I think we accomplish 2 things. When students are arriving, they're waiting for 1 year before they can begin their real program, so we can give them something that's structured as a foundation year. We can begin the process of introducing them to French or helping them further perfect their French. And I think there's a way for us to design that will ease the transition for students coming in and set them up for success later on.
But beyond easing the transition, this idea of reaching an 80% level in proficiency to graduate, if they don't, do we even know? Has the government detailed what would happen if they
80% of
don't
the
get
students
there?
have to.
What happens then?
No, so we don't have the details. So the announcement that came on Friday indicated that with respect to the French language requirement, the government would create a working group with the universities to design what that would look like. Well, let's hope so. But let's hope that, unlike what we've experienced over the last 9 weeks, that it really is a working group, that there really is consultation, and that the government really is prepared to listen to us. I think we are in a position to say, because it's our business, you know what? We know how to teach French as a second language. We've been doing that for years and years and years. So listen to us in terms of what we think is viable, what we think is possible, and how things should be designed. So there are a lot of details, Aaron, that we don't know yet. All of those will come out in what are known as the Hague
The
Vision.
contention was, when this was first announced, this 80% that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I believe maybe Deep Sandy and McGill had said it, this will in essence force students who come into the system to basically take an extra semester just to be able to learn French to that degree. Is that accurate?
So that could be, so the challenge is that there are programs, accreditation programs like engineering and business, where students have very little margin of maneuver. If you're in engineering, you're essentially taking engineering courses. This is why we have to go back to that foundation year, because that's not a year when they're taking engineering courses.
And that's when you're making up
And that's
the
when we
French.
can start to make up the French.
Okay.
And then it's easier if we can get them to a point to find a way to complement that with a summer course or something along along those lines.
Graham, how gobsmacked were you when this whole came? Did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine that this was going to, in the midst of all the other things that you have to do in a university administration, did you ever see this coming?
No, is the short answer to that. I mean, the minister had said earlier in the spring that she was concerned about students coming from other parts of Canada, other parts of the world, who weren't staying in Montreal after they graduated. So the three universities met with the minister, and we said, we understand that. And my team and I went back to her for a meeting in late June where we said, this is what we're already doing, this is what we're prepared to do more. There was never any discussion around increasing tuition for rest of Canada. Yes, there were concerns that Concordia and McGill benefited from our ability to attract international students more than other universities, although even that's problematic because the growth in international students in the last few years in Quebec, it's in the Francophone sector, not in the Anglophone sector. So no, Bill, no real forewarning of this whatsoever.
And like the raison d'etre is too much English being spoken on the streets of Montreal by students. Hello?
Yeah, that was the biggest rub of all. To have to actually hear
Hello?
that. Yeah.
I mean, seriously? I mean, what about like the summer months or 6 months of largely American tourists? It's a lot of English being spoken.
So just to put this in perspective, because rest of Canada students had a real target put on them, at Concordia we take about 900 new rest of Canada students into programs each year. So if 900 students coming from the rest of Canada is creating a threat to the French language in Montreal, I would really like to see the data reports that proves that.
It doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
I'm curious, the other thing that always bothered me from the get-go was the explanation by the higher education minister, by Pascal Derry, that French universities here are grossly underfunded, and that the extra money in the tuition hike would be used to help fund
balance.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, now there'll be no extra money since McGill is handing out grants, and you're going to try to do the same thing. I mean, that's a pretty specious argument.
It is a specious argument. So the argument that I think the minister should have been making is the one that is black and white, which is that the university sector in Quebec across the board has been underfunded between $1.4 billion and $2 billion a year for years and years and years. And so it's not just a question of Francophone universities being underfunded. Right. I recognize that they are. The way to deal with that is to invest in the higher education system, not to reach into the wallet of Concordia or McGill to see what you can find to redistribute to the other sectors. And the flawed logic of making decisions that are going to have a negative impact on our recruitment and then somehow expecting that recruitment is going to generate funding for redistribution doesn't make much sense.
Was it at least gratifying for you, and I think we mentioned this in English media, this was one thing we hadn't expected, as soon as this announcement came out, you were starting to get support from the French side, from French universities, as opposed to UQAM, for example, but they were coming out and saying this is not the right way to address this problem.
You know, it's a Pyrrhic victory, but the fact that we were able to keep that in the story alive for 9 weeks. I mean, university funding is not the sexiest topic or on the planet, and there are a lot of other very critical issues that the world is facing. The fact that we were able to keep that story alive for 9 weeks and continue to get increasing support from Francophone influencers, from the Conseil des Patronats, from the Chambre de Commerce, from the Mairesse de Montréal, even from people like Louis Bernard, for instance. I think that was pretty remarkable, not to mention the 5 Francophone charter universities.
But then just as disappointing to find out all that support meant absolutely nothing to the government.
All that support meant absolutely nothing to the government.
What about the legal challenges? Are you optimistic Julius Gray is getting involved there?
I'm guessing by the smile you're not. Is that not an option?
Well,
here?
I think all I'll say is we're going to consider all our options. You know, we need to see what the final règles budgétaires look like. We'll be a month or 2 months away from that, and clearly everybody's assessing all the options that could be on the table. But at this point, it's too. I'm not in a position to speak to that.
But timing-wise, I mean, as you say this, I think to myself, we know kids apply, early in the year to go to school. by the time this gets settled, kicks in,
Yeah.
you'll already have been adversely affected. won't you?
That's why we asked for at least a year delay. Was it so much to ask for a year delay when we're in the middle of the recruitment season? Students are, in some cases, probably already chosen where they're going to go. Our registrations close end of February, beginning of March. We're now entering into the holiday period. I mean, what kind of marketing campaign or operational campaign do we have to put in place, or McGill have to put in place, to try to salvage that part of the rest of Canada, and frankly internationally, that we know wants to come here but is just confused about what's waiting for them?
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. I have a question, I just sort of separately. I remember when we were first talking about this, when the government came out with the plan, it was out-of-province students, and then there was an issue about international students, depending on where you came from, France, Belgium, Switzerland, special deals, sweetheart deals. Where's that deal? If you come here from, I don't know where, from the U.S., for example, will you end up being considered as someone to pay the $12,000, or where are you?
No. So international student fees are different. So international students across the board pay more than rest of Canada students, with one exception. And the exception is students from France and Belgium. And that's because of historic agreements that the government of Quebec has had. So ironically, one of the outcomes of what was announced last week is that because of those historic agreements, a student from France will continue to pay $9,000 to study at Concordia, but a student from Ottawa will pay $12,000 to study at Concordia. Now, I'm not quite sure in what universe that makes sense, but it doesn't make a lot of sense from where I sit.
Right. Why are we, I have a niece who came from Paris and went to McGill. Yeah. And, we're all Quebecers are saying, why are we subsidizing these kids with our taxes, kids who come from the rest of Canada? I got to say, why are we subsidizing kids? She had a lot of very wealthy friends who came with her from Paris. Yeah. And these kids were paying, I guess they were paying $9,000 to go to McGill. Yeah. And boy, I mean, why are we subsidizing kids to go to McGill or Concordia and not kids from the rest of Canada? I mean, all these things just don't make sense.
And what about French speakers from Africa? They don't seem to benefit.
So they don't benefit currently. That's a really good question.
What does that say?
So because you
do
run the risk
here from Mozambique, I don't get this. Even though French is my
Gabon, Morocco, or Gabon,
Algeria,
or Cote d'Ivoire.
Yeah.
No, so there's a bit of a there's a class basis in international student mobility.
I want to mention again this 80%.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have kids who are 22 and 19 who went through the CEGEP, went to French elementary school, still struggled with the classes. I mean, I don't want to talk about the intelligence level of my kids. That wouldn't be fair. But I'm just saying they still struggled with French classes to get out of CEGEP, to get their diploma. This is we're saying, a lot of people say it's not a high level. Sorry. For somebody coming from the States or elsewhere who's never spoken French, intermediate level is high. It's a very difficult language to learn. I spent my whole life learning it. This, to me, is almost a higher requirement. I mean, the money is one thing, but asking kids to get that level, students, not kids, of French, so they will not get their diploma if they don't have it?
Well, we don't know that.
80%, they say. What is that?
We don't know that. So
80% have to attain that.
That's what we're told.
Although that 80%, this is what I asked before, if you don't reach that 80%, it's not that the students don't necessarily get to graduate. Does the university lose funding?
So the way it was framed is that the way it was framed is that it would not penalize the student from graduating, but that the university would have a financially penalized.
But you still have to give them the courses.
You still have to give them.
Do you have enough teachers? Actually, are there enough French teachers?
That's the capacity issue.
Not enough teachers.
That's why we also said 40% is a good goal for us at the beginning. 80% is another world, especially at the moment when, by the way, you're taking decisions that are cutting our budget capacity. So I think we're being set up to fail with what was announced last week. Now, the minister also said, and I haven't quite managed to process this in my mind, that the 80% could include, that the phrase she used was non-Quebecois, and that meant that students who were French would count within the 80%. So I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to Francicize the students from France. It just isn't making sense.
Well, they're making up on the fly, it looks like.
Correct.
Is it fair to say that one of the biggest problems in this entire story has been the communication or lack of same from the government from the get-go?
Absolutely. There's been no real meaningful consultations back and forth. I think that's why the Anglophone universities not once but twice went forward with proposals which we thought were elegant compromises, which addressed the government's priorities, but at the same time would allow us to preserve our identity and our revenue stream. And I think it was a pretty significant statement for 3 English language universities to publicly say, we recognize that French is a vulnerable language in North America. We're prepared to work to support that. I think,
Wow.
as somebody who's, a Quebecois who's spent my whole professional life here as well, I don't remember another time when a major Anglophone institution led by acknowledging that. And to me, that was a gesture of partnership, of collaboration, and I have to say that it feels like a bit of a one-way street based on what we got in return.
And all this because someone might have lost an election in Quebec City try to assure their base that they can be as nationalistic as anybody else. I mean, it just seems so bizarre. This whole language thing seems like a smokescreen. And
there's another part of it, Bill, though, I think that should be of concern to all of us, and that's that this has put a real cloud over Montreal.
yes,
We've worked for decades, many people across all party lines have worked for decades to build Montreal as one of the great university cities in the world. And it is.
And
Students
Concordia
wanna
has
come
made
in.
huge
and
headway.
we've made
Yes.
huge headway. And this, to me, is a policy decision that is kind of thumbing its nose at Montreal, and is designed to appeal to a base elsewhere. And I think that's a real shame. That's something that is going to be difficult to recover from, not just for Concordia or McGill, but for Université de Montréal, for HEC, for Polytechnique as well. And I think that's a real shame because the university sector has been a real jewel for Montreal over the years. I think it's a reason why a lot of large multinationals like Ubisoft and others have decided to set up their location here, because they can get access to talent that's very cosmopolitan, that's multilingual, that's multi-talented. You can't do that everywhere, and I'm concerned, and I think that's why the business community was so strongly in support of us.
You mentioned
about the consequences.
you mentioned budget cuts, salary freezes that are going to be part of this, at least from what we know now. Does this, maybe it's unfair to ask, does this, if this continues, put Concordia's future in jeopardy?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it puts our future in jeopardy, but it's going to make the next 5 years really complicated. So, student registration is the lifeblood of your operations in a university. I mean, you need student registration because your mission is to teach and do research, but at the end of the day, it's registration that drives the financial capacity of the university. So if you if you encounter a situation where suddenly that revenue stream is threatened, then that's going to have a profound impact on your operations. And of course, in universities, we have a lot of fixed costs with salaries, etc. There's not a big margin of maneuver there. So for us, and maybe, Aaron, if I can just tie this back to the underfunding situation in Quebec, because universities have been chronically underfunded for years and years and years and years, the only way that you can meet your increased costs is through growth in registration. And Concordia has been on a terrific growth trajectory until the last 2 years. The pandemic was very disruptive. And it was that growth that allowed us to, even in moments when we were in deficit, see that there was a pathway to get out of that deficit. Now all bets are off, because it's not clear that growth is going to be in our future or McGill's future, and it feels very much like part of the intention of the government is actually to shrink the size of our two institutions.
It's also worth pointing out, though, that there are a lot of francophones
Yeah.
who attend Concordia
Yeah.
and McGill.
Yeah.
In fact, it's kind of well seen
Yeah.
to go to McGill or Concordia as a francophone. They're very interested. I'm surprised that they haven't kind of put a stop on, Quebecois students.
Don't
from
give
a-
them any
Oh,
ideas.
yeah, right.
Well, I
They're
mean,
doing that
I'm
as they teach
surprised
us,
that's
so-
not.
As they did with the SAGEP. So I'd be concerned,
Yep.
we're, and I think McGill's in the same situation, between 20-25% of our student population is Francophone.
Right.
From Quebec, from France is the third largest source of international students at Concordia.
Right. Well, they don't pay much, so
Well,
they get a deal. Yeah.
But still, it's an opportunity to come,
Yep.
to live in a francophone
Yep.
city, to study in English.
They love the
develop
city,
develop that skill
Yep.
and create further opportunities.
When I've traveled, I've met people who've attended in France, Concordia and McGill, and it's true that when people come from elsewhere, they leave with a great impression of the city, and it's
Yeah.
great for the city.
It's
and
great
now,
for the city. Yeah.
I know we have to wrap up, and I appreciate the time you spent with us this morning. You mentioned Concordia already. McGill has announced what they're going to do. You
Yeah.
have a plan.
Yep.
When is this going to be announced?
We'll be announcing that plan early in the new year when the semester resumes. From our perspective, announcing the plan here on the day before the holidays begin doesn't make much sense. People's minds are elsewhere.
We want to
And
give people hope, though.
And we want to give people hope, and there won't be hope. And the last thing I would say is, notwithstanding it all, and this is what's really unfortunate, Concordia is a great university. We have been ranked as the top young university in North America for several years in a row. Just a couple of weeks ago, a ranking came out that measured how universities around the globe perform against ESGs. And, Concordia together with McGill and Université de Montreal were the only three Quebec universities in the top 100 globally. Not to mention, 2 weeks ago, one of our students won a Rhodes Scholarship. I mean, there's so much good that's happening at the university. And I really find it undermining of all of the growth and all of the progress and all of the exciting things that are happening at the university when we're confronting policies like this.
Wish you good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the
Thank you
government
all.
shouldn't be doing that.
They should
We
not.
shouldn't be expecting our government
That's
to
it.
encourage, not discourage.
I would never have thought a government would actually attack
Yep.
the higher education sector as opposed to trying to boost it up.
Or at least part of the higher
Or at least
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
higher education
And you never thought a university administrator would ever have to take to the political aspect of the
man.
job.
Well, I knew there would be some politics, but I have to say this was pretty naked politics.
Yeah.
And,
Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
thank you,
Appreciate
Aaron.
it.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Bill.
Thank
That
you
wraps
very
up
much.
another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. Concordia President Graham Carr, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you again soon.